Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here for episode 914 with Henna Pryor. Henna has a really fun perspective on awkwardness and how we can reframe it and use it to our advantage and propel ongoing growth. So much good stuff. If you find yourself avoiding situations because you think they might be awkward or shuddering after awkward conversational exchanges and wishing that unpleasantness would go away, this is the conversation for you. So you'll learn, one, how not embracing awkwardness is hurting our performance. 2, how to work out your awkwardness muscles. And 3, how to release the discomfort that follows awkward moments. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced, please visit us at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP914. And if you're at awesomeatyourjob.com, I recommend you check out some of our extra resources like the Gold Nugget email list, which gives you a summary write-up of the actionable wisdom that each guest shares. That releases right when the episode goes live that same day, and as well as unlocking the whole archive, the vault of 914 of these summaries. Those are the gold nuggets at awesomeatyourjob.com. Now, here's a bit about Henna. Henna Pryor, PCC, is a 2-time TEDx and global keynote speaker, workplace performance expert, author, and executive coach. Her talks blend 2 decades of work with corporate leaders and teams with a modern science-based approach to taking more strategic risks and being braver in the work that we do. Now, here's Henna. Henna, welcome to How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Thank you for having me. And it's the greatest podcast name I think I have ever heard.
Oh, well, thank you. That's what we'd like to hear. We try. Well, I'm excited to hear about the wisdom you've got for us in your book, Good Awkward, How to Embrace the Embarrassing and Celebrate the Cringe to Become the Bravest You. But first, we need to hear, what is the story with you being a genuine, bona fide princess?
It's not so much a story as more of a fun fact. So my parents are both South Asian. My dad was born in India. My mom was born in Pakistan. And so technically, I am a 32nd generation Pakistani princess, which just means, bloodline. I am from royal bloodline. Now that said, Pakistan is no longer a monarchy. So my princess status means bupkis. Absolutely nothing. I get no perks whatsoever.
Well, do your loved ones treat you like a princess?
Most days. I think I get trolled in even measure, but yeah, I get some good treatment.
Okay, nifty. So nothing happens then, like if you visit Pakistan or you're...
No red carpet, no elephants. No, my grandfather, my mom's father, was treated with a little bit of, let's call it extra respect due to his family name. But really, as the generations go on, it's less and less cool. There's really no measurable perks. So I'm still waiting.
No certificate, no jewels.
No.
Okay.
No. I wish, but no.
All right. Well, now I know. I appreciate that. That was fun. Well, now tell us a little bit when it comes to awkwardness. First of all, I just got to hear, since you are an authority on awkwardness, and I've just got to go here first and foremost. I find it very annoying. And maybe you do this, so sorry.
That'll be even more awkward. Here, hit me.
And this hasn't happened much since I've been a grown-up, as opposed to maybe like high school, college, when someone just proclaims, awkward. It's like, oh, wow. That just grates on me so much. It's like, this is not helpful. And now it's way more awkward because you've just proclaimed it as such. Since you're an awkwardness expert, what is your hot take on this phenomenon?
Yeah. So it's funny. I don't mind when people claim it. I think what you're describing is when they claim it so loudly and ostentatiously that it draws even a greater magnified lens to whatever the experience was. And so ironically, the avoidance of awkwardness increases awkwardness. So I actually teach people it's okay to name it in the room. It's when we make a really big, audacious deal out of it, awkward, and it kind of the way you did it, that it actually almost has the opposite effect where it adds to the feeling of attention is on this, right? Embarrassment. When we subtly name it, it actually allows us to relax and move on. But I think when we amplify it that way, it can actually make it linger longer than it needs to and draw an even brighter spotlight to something that maybe people didn't even notice that much in the first place.
Oh, certainly. Like this is, hey, I'm sorry, this is sort of awkward, but your credit card has been declined. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough. That is all right. Well, let's try another one, and that's that. Versus yelling at loud and proud,
shouting. Right. I agree. Yeah, I think the whole point of navigating our awkwardness has to do with the idea that we are in this tension space between who we believe we are and who we think other people see. In that moment, oh my gosh, they think I'm someone who has terrible credit, whose card was declined. I might feel a bit awkward about it, but the whole problem with the emotion, or the thing that we tend to wrestle with, is what we think other people see in that moment. So if we declare it loudly, we're just putting more eyes on that version. It's kind of counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell us, any particularly surprising or fascinating discoveries you've made about us humans and awkwardness as you've dived into this research?
Yeah, several. And I think especially as it relates to your topic of expertise here about, being awesome at your job and being a high performer at work, there's some very interesting data that came out in the last year or two about how catering and performing actually decreases our workplace performance. So I'll explain what I mean by that. We've had a wave of conversations around be more authentic at work, right? Authenticity is the superpower. Be more authentic at work. And people hear that and they agree with it. You see the nods. They're like, yep, that seems like it would be a good idea. But then more often than not, I work with clients who tell me, yeah, that would be great. How? I don't know how to be more authentic at work. Can somebody give me the playbook? I don't understand why I just can't show up that way. It doesn't feel quite that simple. And so what I've discovered in some of the research is when people feel awkward or unsure or embarrassed, or they're fearing awkwardness at work, what they tend to do instead is something called catering, which is essentially putting on a bit of a performance to meet other people's expectations. I have a new boss. They expect me probably to be like this or show up like that. So I'm behaving in a way that caters to their expectations. I'm performing to meet what I think they expect of me. And while first impressions do matter, I don't want to diminish that. There's actually now a significant body of research from Francesca Gino and her team at Harvard that says that catering to meet other people's expectations not only diminishes our performance at work, but frankly, it's exhausting. We collapse into bed at the end of the night. We don't do our best work. We don't save our energy for the things that we genuinely want to do to make an impact at work. And so there's actually a lot of downside to that catering behavior instead of coming in stumbles, fumbles, and all.
Can you give us a few examples of typical workplace catering behavior that has the potential to kill our energy and our performance?
Sure. I'll give you actually the study that really found this, and then I'll give you just a run-of-the-mill example at work. So in Francesca Gino's Harvard research, they actually were studying a team of inventors, kind of entrepreneurs who were pitching their ideas to investors. They were trying to get funding for their ideas. And what they actually found was those who catered to meet the investors' expectations, in other words, told them what they thought the investors wanted to hear, were actually 3 times less likely to get the funding than those who came in still prepared, but a little bit more authentic, a bit more passionate, a bit more honest, which was inclusive of stumbles, fumbles, and all, right? That's one example. Another example that I see a lot is when we think about awkward conversations, it's the whole diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging discussion. Most people still struggle to have those conversations in the workplace. They find it very awkward. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing. They're afraid of not getting it right. So instead, a lot of people will cater. I think this is what my colleague of color wants me to say. I think this is the right thing to say in this meeting. And it actually kind of comes across as a performance versus it is actually much more impactful to say, hey, I tried to think thoughtfully about, this part of the conversation, but I don't know if I'm going to say the right thing right now. There's a chance I might get it wrong and it might stumble out of my mouth, but I'm going to give it an attempt anyway. That version actually lands better. So it's when we perform, it's when we try to smooth out the bumps of areas where we do feel a bit uncomfortable, that it actually has an inverse impact to what we think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Understood. Well, so I'd love to hear then in terms of awkwardness becoming our strength instead of our weakness. How do we begin to think about, reframe, and make that true for us?
Sure. So again, just to put a spotlight on a definition that we're going to operate from for the context of this conversation, awkwardness is an emotion that we feel when the person we believe ourselves to be, or our true self, is momentarily at odds with the person that they see on display. In other words, the person we are for a moment in time, or maybe several moments, feels different than who they see. So I'm jumping on a podcast with you today, Pete, and I butcher your last name, right? I mispronounce it horribly. And I feel awkward and embarrassed about that for a moment because the person I believe myself to be, someone who is intentional and prepared when it comes to the pronunciation of names, for that moment feels at odds with the person who I think you see, someone who is not thoughtful about names, someone who is not trying, right? There's a gap between those two people. And so when we think about our professional lives, every time we're at an inflection point, a growth point, a transition point, we're going to invite opportunities for awkwardness. We're going to invite opportunities for embarrassment. And it's learning how to get comfortable with those that actually leads to us continuing to take the chances that contribute to our growth. When we can't lean into them, we tend to avoid them and run away from them, which becomes very problematic when we're trying to advance our careers and our lives.
Okay, so within this definition, awkwardness is when there is a difference between who we believe ourselves to be versus what someone else is perceiving from us in a moment. And now that's pretty specific as opposed to generalized discomfort about any number of things. Like I'll feel awkward when I guess maybe not your definition of awkward. Like if I just disagree with somebody, I will experience a sensation of discomfort that I would have previously called awkward, although that's not exactly in harmony with your definition, or is it?
It is, I think, to a degree. So maybe let's peel back the layer one more bit to help unpack that. Awkwardness is also a social emotion, meaning if you read something online by yourself and you didn't agree with it, you wouldn't feel awkward about that because no one is there to hear you. Right? Even if you were to express your disagreement out loud, that person is an idiot. They don't know what they're talking about. No one is there to hear you. So you don't feel awkward because awkwardness is a social emotion, meaning that others have to exist. Now, awkwardness also exists as a social emotion when what we think is going to happen isn't met. So in our minds, we've built some certain expectation of how an interaction is going to go, how a chat is going to go, and our expectation isn't met. So in the case of the example that you gave, when you wildly disagree with something that someone said, probably subconsciously, there was some part of you that expected that conversation to go a bit differently. So yeah, there probably are some other uncomfortable feelings and emotions mixed up in that. But part of that may have been a feeling of awkwardness because suddenly you are finding yourself feeling a little thrown off balance or a bit unprepared because you didn't expect the conversation to go that way.
And it's also interesting when you experience this, like, I'm just thinking about TV comedies, awkward situations, like The Office. Michael Scott says just some outrageous things and the situation, like you feel uncomfortable watching it, but it's also very engaging. It's like, oh my gosh, oh, cringe, what's going to happen here? And this is hilariously inappropriate and whoa. So there too, I suppose, I have a different set of expectations as to what would normally unfold in such a scenario.
Yeah, I love that you brought that example up because I have a whole section in the book where I talk about this. That's actually an entire genre of comedy referred to as cringe comedy. So there's The Office, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Borat, Curb Your Enthusiasm, America's Funniest Home Videos. There's a certain genre of comedy that is called cringe comedy. You watch it almost with that expectation of the things you're going to watch are going to make you go, oh, ooh, eek. But what's interesting about this is part of the research that I dove into that was also fascinating is there are some people, you kind of alluded to this already, who can point at cringe comedy and laugh and go, oh my God, this is so entertaining. This is hilarious. There are others who cannot deal, right? They are underneath the covers. They're like, oh, I feel this fully from head to toe, right? I feel Diversity Day, Scott's Tots, right? You know, these episodes, they're like, I cannot watch this without having full body embarrassment. And so interestingly, people who have that experience on that extreme actually have something that they feel very strongly called vicarious embarrassment, which is actually a function of empathy. When you're particularly high on a certain type of empathy, not only do you feel that embarrassment or awkwardness and cringe for someone momentarily, but you actually take it on with them as though it's your own, and it becomes this full body visceral reaction.
Okay, so working with this definition of awkwardness now, Tell us, how do we make this so that it really is a jet fuel, source of strength and power?
Yes. So two-part process here. Number one is just self-awareness around this emotion in particular. So as we started to say, it is not the same as just regular discomfort. Awkwardness as a social emotion is very tied to approval. What do other people see? Do they like what they see? Do they approve of who they see? So one of the first things we need to do is just peel back our own layers of self-awareness around the messages we received around awkwardness and approval growing up. Were you someone who grew in a household where it was, hey, don't speak up and stand out, right? Just kind of blend in. It's going to be more likely that you feel awkward as an adult if you've never undone those messages. Are there, stories that you've told yourself about what previous awkward interactions have meant? So I like Dan McAdams' research out of Northwestern. He refers to two types of stories. Let's say you have an awkward situation at work where you spoke up in a meeting and it was total bomb, embarrassing, did not feel good. Do you tell yourself a contamination story? Meaning, well, that was a nightmare and I'm never going to raise my hand ever again. It contaminates the future. Or do you look for the redemption story, which is, okay, that didn't feel so great, but I tried it. I raised my hand. I don't normally do that in that meeting. I got some practice in. Hopefully it'll go better the next time, right? What are the stories we tell ourselves? Part two is conditioning. And I am very passionate about this as it relates to this topic in particular. What we're talking about when we're talking about building awkward muscle and using it as a strength is building some strength in our social musculature. Social fitness is a type of muscle building, meaning we have to have interactions with other humans in small stakes moments so that we can use that feeling as fuel instead of something to be fearful of. And in this modern climate, we live in a world that's optimized for smoothness. I don't technically have to talk to another human being outside of my immediate family today if I don't really want to. I can order my food online. I can, order my groceries on Amazon or the Instacart. We don't have to talk to folks the way we used to. And nowadays, increasingly in the grocery store line, we're looking down on our phones. We're hammering the elevator door buttons shut to avoid a 2-minute ride with someone. We go to the coffee shop, we have in headphones. So the problem is when we don't have chances to practice our social muscle in small stakes situations, when it comes to a big stakes moment, like negotiating for your higher salary or trying to advocate for yourself for a promotion, we are increasingly out of practice using these social muscles. So if we don't practice in small stakes moments to increase that awkward tolerance, the big stakes moments become nearly unbearable. And so we really need to create opportunities to condition and put in the repetitions when it comes to these social muscles.
Okay. Well, could you share with us a cool story of someone who put in the reps, where they start from, what did they do, and what cool results do they see on the other side?
Absolutely. Yeah. I do some executive coaching and I worked with a private client named Satya. I talk about her a bit in the book. She was painfully shy. Her parents, very gregarious, extroverted, her sister as well. And not only was she sort of naturally introverted and shy, but she had begun a new job during the pandemic, at which point she really didn't have any ability to meet her peers in person. And she would see for a period of time, her peers continue to get promoted ahead of her because they had had the advantage of things like networking. And she didn't have natural places to do so, having worked from home by herself. So she realized, hey, if I want to get ahead, I got to do this thing that I don't particularly love, I find very awkward, which is networking. So she practiced in the small stakes moments. So first things, once the restrictions started to lift, she's like, my first at bat here can't be the networking event with my entire company and 200 people. She challenged herself to meet up with an old colleague first, who she hadn't seen in a really long time. That was at her growth edge. She went and tapped on the door of a neighbor who she'd kind of known, but not really, and struck up a conversation. She made it a mission that every time she rode the subway, she lived in the city, she was going to leave her headphones out and try to just catch eyes and exchange a smile with someone, low key, little old lady, right? Nothing aggressive. But she slowly started to recondition these muscles that had kind of gone stagnant. And then slowly but surely, she put herself in slightly bigger rooms. A friend invited her out to, a wine tasting event. She said, normally I don't do that stuff, but it was a small group. So I tried it. Slowly but surely built her way up. So by the time in 2 months, when her company had their big kind of networking extravaganza company offsite, she felt a bit more prepared. And she had some lines on the ready. She had kind of practiced what this was going to look like. So in her case, we actually came up with a strategy that she would find one other person or at least two other people that were standing kind of by their lonesome, potentially in the same situation. And she had a line that she had practiced in the mirror about 100 times. It was this: my sister told me I needed to talk to at least 2 new people today, and we have a bet for $20. I really don't want to pay her $20. Will you be one of them? And she said it immediately diffused the tension. It created this little icebreaker moment. And this colleague, the first one she actually ended up introducing herself to, they ended up collaborating on a project later that year. Huge win for her, huge visibility. And none of that would have happened had she not kind of put in these reps and created these strategies ahead of time.
That's cool. Well, so what do you recommend in terms of the different means by which we put in the reps? If this were an exercise program, what are the best exercises that give us great gains and the suggested frequency and dosage of them?
Sure. I'll give you 2 buckets. First, from the team perspective. So if you work on a team or if you're a leader of a team, I would be so happy if you incorporated some specific and intentional exercises into your team meetings as it relates to this. Again, understand this is not something that happens by accident anymore. We don't have as many bump into each other at the water cooler moments, so we have to create intention. Some of my favorite ways to do this are I'll encourage leaders to have 5 minutes at the top of the meeting, have a bad idea brainstorm, meaning you're encouraging your teams on purpose. I want you to share only unrealistic ideas. Realistic ideas not allowed. And people are thinking, why? Why would I do that? Well, believe it or not, often the most unrealistic ideas, somewhere in there is one that's kind of like, hey, that actually could be possible. Second is even if none of them are, just by starting that way, it lowers people's guard. And the ideas that follow in the rest of the meeting are more innovative, they're more creative, they're more generative, and people are more open. There's a similar exercise you can do. I call them cracked egg stories, where you go around and every single person in the meeting, you can do it either, one at a time, or you can turn to a partner. Everyone shares one cracked egg moment from the past week or two, a time where something did not work as planned, or it was kind of a misstep, a fumble. It was embarrassing. It was awkward. It didn't go the way we hoped. And what did you learn from it? But again, by putting these into the room, intentionally creating the space for them to be put into the room, we create a more normalization of this behavior and this emotion that everyone experiences. The thing that's wild about awkwardness and embarrassment is when you're experiencing it and feeling it, you feel like it's just you. It feels like nobody else is dealing with this emotion the way that I am. And the truth of the matter is, everyone is. And so normalizing it in meetings on purpose is a huge, helpful step to creating the types of environments that can take more chances and take more risks in the future.
All right. So that's the team perspective. And then individually?
Individually, again, it sounds simple, but I would love to see this actually done. I would like to challenge you, listener of this show, today, next time you are in the supermarket checkout line, leave your phone in your pocket. Leave your phone in your bag, right? Next time you go to the coffee shop or ride the train or ride the plane, just for a few minutes, leave your headphones out, right? The goal is to put yourself in minor social situations where certainty is not guaranteed. I call them strategic micro risks, right? If you reach out to someone in the coffee shop that's standing in front of you in line and say, hey, I love your sneakers. Okay, chance that they could look at you like you're a moron, chance that they continue to strike up the conversation and you meet someone fascinating and interesting. I was sitting next to a woman at the train station the other day, much older woman, and just kind of struck up conversation instead of sitting on my phone. I found out that she went to the same college I did, University of Delaware, but 30 years before me. She kind of knew who my father-in-law was, which was wild, right? But these are just life moments where there was no stakes. This was not a professional conversation. But by practicing in those moments where certainty is not guaranteed, what I need you all to understand is you are creating the needed muscle to have other conversations in your professional life where certainty is not guaranteed. So it's about getting comfortable with that uncertainty. If you really want to fast track this, take an improv class. Take an improv class. If you really want to fast track your uncertainty tolerance, improv is the fastest class that you can, or the fastest way you can do it, because the entire thing is built on this premise of I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm just going to stay with it. I'm just going to lean in. I'm just going to stick with it instead of avoiding it or deflecting it. I'm going to stay with it. And that is the fastest way you can fast track your awkward tolerance.
Okay, that's fun. Any other recommended exercises?
Oh gosh, so many. I mean, I've got like a dozen improv exercises I take people to. I also recommend to people to strategically use humor, right? I think some people are like, well, I'm not funny. I'm not a ha-ha. Strategically using humor in awkward situations is something that benefits everyone. And when I say strategically, it's typically just rooted in some sort of truth. So I said at the top, the avoidance of awkwardness increases awkwardness. Sometimes all it takes is that one person to gently name, like, okay, I'll be the first to break that awkward silence, right? Or, ooh, that was cringe. Nobody expected that. But it just takes the one person to bring a little bit of that lightness back into the room for folks to move on. Humor has to just be used strategically, because I think generally what we want to do is make sure that we are not punching down, right? So if you're a leader, we don't want to shame anyone. Like if a junior person is trying to raise their hand and maybe they don't get it wrong, there's a silence. A leader should not say, hey, that was pretty awkward, buddy. That's not necessarily helpful, but there is sort of a general rule of thumb that, not to kick down, but you can punch up, right? So if the leader says something, we can all smile and go, ooh, awkward, but in a gentle, playful way. So there are some rules. And again, we go into it in detail, but also just learning how to find your own talk tracks. I think talk tracks are really helpful and important. When something doesn't feel good, having language that resonates with you that you can use right away. So I'll share tactically. There's an early example in the book where one of my very first meetings after we started reconvening in person, I met with a sales leader. I was trying to win a very big project, large scale project. I hadn't met folks in person in a while, right? Restrictions had just lifted. So 15 minutes, I'm going on and on, I'm pitching and I'm thinking, Henna, I'm crushing it, right? So I did sales for 14 years. I'm like, I'm crushing it. And he puts his hand in front of my face and I'm like, sweet. So I give him a high five. I'm like, nailing it, Henna, nailing it. And then he says, this is the next thing out of his mouth. Henna, I was putting my hand up because I was trying to tell you to stop. And I'm like, oh my God, she's forgotten how to people, right? I'm mortified. But luckily, having been in this research and doing this work, the next line immediately out of my mouth was exactly that, which is, wow, okay, I'm mortified, but that was pretty awkward. Hopefully I can still have a chance to keep going with you. And just by owning it, he laughed, I laughed, our shoulders relaxed, and we were able to move on. Had I let the awkwardness overtake me and have a grip on me, I would have gotten totally off the rails. The whole conversation would have left on a very different note. And so ironically, it's not about eliminating it or avoiding it, because again, that's trying to eliminate or avoid uncertainty. It's not going to happen. It's learning how to lean into it, to own it, to embrace it, and use it as a force for good. You tried something, relate to folks, create some connection, lean into those uncertain moments, and move on.
That's really cool. And this reminds me a little bit of rejection therapy, where you just ask for things that you'll probably not get. Like, hey, can I have a discount on whatever, etc. And so what's fun about this is it's easier than rejection therapy, because your odds are better that you're not going to hear a no per se. And it's broader in that you can have conversations about a much bigger range of things than simply requests. Like, could you please do this for me? No. Could you please do this for me? No. As well as having more of an extended exchange as opposed to just a simple no. It's like, okay, I guess that's the end of that conversation. Any thoughts about the parallels there with rejection therapy?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a lower stakes form of, exposure therapy or rejection therapy. I think the goal is to recognize that we are increasingly sensitive to social interactions gone awry because we're out of practice. So in the case of this gentleman who I high-fived when he clearly wasn't looking for a high five, what was occurring, and the research actually now corroborates this, is that because we were in isolation in the pandemic, we started to lose our ability to read other people's social cues. And this is something that we know is true because there's been studies done on people whose jobs are more isolated by nature. For example, astronauts or polar explorers, people whose jobs are isolated, they found that when they returned to social settings, those social skills atrophied, meaning they had difficulty properly reading someone's body language, their gestures, their cues. The same thing can happen to us. And this is where I'm also very careful to point out that awkwardness is not something limited to introverts. I am 100% an extrovert through and through. I don't think there's an introverted bone in my body. But after the pandemic, we all realized that we could get this kind of off balance. Okay, my social skills aren't quite what they used to be. And again, in this moment in time where we can order our food online, my 13-year-old and I joke, she doesn't ring her friends' doorbells. She's like, Mom, just text them here. Text them we're in the driveway. Text them here. And I'm like, text them here. I used to have to talk to my friends' parents on the phone for 10 minutes before they got on the line. But we don't have these same opportunities for unexpected happenstance social interactions. So we actually have to be more intentional about carving them out to create that desensitization or that exposure therapy. We actually have to go seek it out a bit more.
Okay. And I'm thinking if you have had an awkward, embarrassing, cringy moment in the past, maybe the distant past or the recent past, that continues to pop up and spook us. It haunts us in the here and now. Any tips for how do we deal with that?
Sure. This is common. I think, we can call it by a variety of names. It's rumination, it's lingering, right? Some situation had such a grip on us that it seems to keep rearing its head. I would offer two thoughts here. First, it's okay if you think about it. I'm not concerned about you thinking about it. Humans are wired for social acceptance. If those thoughts come up every now and then, I don't mind. The difference is, do those thoughts keep you in a cycle of inaction the next time, right? Does that thought have such a grip strength on you that you don't take the chance or say the thing the next time? So part of what I coach my own clients through is just to slow down the thinking. What are people actually thinking? Often when we are replaying a situation in our mind, we're making the assumption that they think we're a moron. They think we're inept. They think we're unqualified. So there's a few things I remind them of. First of all, remind yourself of the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is a phenomenon coined by Tom Gilovich out of Cornell that is essentially pointing to the idea that people are not paying nearly as close attention to you as you think they are. They're more concerned with themselves. They've already turned the spotlight back onto themselves. They've forgotten about you long ago. Second thing that I love to remind people of is there's a phenomenon called the pratfall effect, which is if you are generally someone who is smart, competent, capable, skillful, if you are generally someone who is seen that way and you commit a blunder or a misstep or you say the wrong thing, not only will people not hold it against you for the rest of your life like you think, it actually makes you more likable. There's a body of research that says that when you are generally seen as smart, capable, and have a decent level of aptitude, a blunder makes you human. It knocks you off the pedestal that other people put you on, and it actually makes you more warm and likable. So there's actually an upside to these things. If you are working hard, and if you are someone who generally is prepared, and these things happen, give yourself some grace. People are not tearing you apart the way that you're tearing yourself apart.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you've got a fun turn of phrase I want to hear about. Protagonist disease. What is it and why should we watch out for it?
Yeah, it's similar to the spotlight effect in that often when we are concerned about approval and when we are chasing a version of ourselves that we want other people to see, the millennial Gen Z population these days refer to it as having main character energy, right? We think that we're the star of the show. Everyone is paying attention to what we're doing, to what we're saying, to how we're saying it. In the social media era, this feels even more pronounced, right? Everyone is dissecting everything. But here's the truth. Everyone is a protagonist in their own story. But as far as you're concerned, you're an extra in their story. You are not the center of their world. And often when we are so consumed with what will other people think about this awkward moment, this misstep, this embarrassing thing, we become so consumed with this idea that we are the protagonist of everyone's story. The truth is, we're not. They are the protagonists of their own story. We are merely an extra. And if we can remind ourselves of that regularly, it helps release some of that grip strength of everyone is watching because they rarely are.
All right. Well, Henna, tell me anything else you want to make sure to mention before we shift gears and hear about some of your favorite things.
Oh, last thing I'll just say on this is when I titled the book, Good Awkward, people were like, oh, she wrote a book about me. I can't tell you how many people have responded with that phrase. She wrote a book about me. And what's funny is that everyone says that. And the research actually proves that awkwardness is for everyone. The most confident person you know, the person that you look to and you're like, gosh, they are smooth, flawless. They never have a blunder. They never have a misstep. Guess what? Yes, they do. They experience this emotion just as much as you do. They've just learned how to lean in and they've learned how to accelerate their comeback rate. But they are not exempt from this. It is for everyone, you included, your favorite celebrity included. And so just knowing that hopefully helps everybody relax a little bit.
All right. Well, now could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
Favorite quote. This is probably silly and funny, but it's one that I say all the time. Don't sweat the petty things and don't pet the sweaty things.
Okay. And do you have a favorite study or experiment, a bit of research?
The vicarious embarrassment one that I shared earlier to me is really fun. I think the one I mentioned cringe comedy, but the other one that I thought was really exciting was this idea of embarrassment for versus embarrassment with. So let's just say, Pete, you walk up the steps to the stage and you've got toilet paper out of the back of your pants. You don't know it's there. And so only I feel embarrassed. You don't even feel it. And if you knew it was there, then what I'm doing is empathy. But if you don't know that it's there, then what I'm doing is judgment. And I think that it's a really interesting exploration of how our own tendencies to judge actually impacts our own ability to take risks. So I think all the research around that shared empathy and vicarious embarrassment is my favorite stuff to talk about.
Okay. And a favorite book?
Probably The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown on nonfiction and on fiction Americana by Chimamanda Adichie.
All right. And a favorite tool? Something you use to be awesome at your job?
I think that technology can be a gift when used appropriately. I think technologies that numb us from social interaction is tough, but I hate to be cliche in this moment in time. I think that ChatGPT and generative AI is the coolest brainstorming partner for any creative work. So I'm going to go AI when used correctly as a brainstorming partner.
All right. And a favorite habit?
Can I cheat and say my favorite habit is habit stacking? I'm not someone who necessarily would just choose one habit, but I find I'm effective at picking up good habits when I stack them. So for example, as I'm washing the dishes, I start a cup of tea because I want to be someone who drinks tea at night. So it becomes a routine that as I'm doing the dishes after dinner, I start my water for tea. So anytime my habits stack, I like those habits the best because I'm more likely to do them.
Can you tell me more about the phrase, I want to be someone who drinks tea at night?
I want to be someone who chooses healthy habits that serve me and keep me sharp.
Oh, as opposed to boozing.
Right. As opposed to boozing or even as opposed to like a bowl of ice cream, which is what I want sometimes. But I tend to find that the ritual of tea is very calming for me. And I'm someone who runs hard and talks fast, which you've noticed in the last half hour. So this is like a recentering moment for me is the cup of tea at night.
All right. And is there a key nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks? They quote it back to you often?
The one that's coming up all the time lately is do it awkward, but do it anyway.
Okay. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
LinkedIn is my preferred playground. So there, if possible, I'm also on Instagram, Henna Pryor, and all the places. And information about the book is at goodawkward.com.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
I do. If you want to be awesome at your job and you are not a polar explorer or astronaut, meaning you don't work completely by yourself, if you work with other people, I wanted you to challenge yourself this week to do something that strengthens your social muscle. If that's striking up a conversation in the grocery store line, if that is ringing the doorbell instead of texting here, find one opportunity to put yourself in a social situation that you otherwise might have had an inclination to avoid, and just see how it feels, see how it serves you, and message me on LinkedIn. Let me know how it goes.
All right. Henna, thank you. This has been a treat. I wish you much luck and fun in your awkward moments.
Thank you for having me.
I really love Henna's perspective on how many of us have perhaps gotten a little bit of socially out of shape, whether that's with the super convenience of apps and the pandemic, and awkwardness is a thing that is not a permanent affliction, but rather a sensation that we can practice, we can move through, and in so doing, we can be bolder and bolder. It's so funny. I was just watching this TV series, Undercover Billionaire, and I was amazed how I felt awkwardness as the contestants, the people in the reality TV show, were making ridiculous asks of people. And I felt uncomfortable just watching someone on a reality TV show make a bold ask that required someone to do basically a ton of work for free. This happened over and over again in the show. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I could do that. Oh, it's so uncomfortable just watching it. And that's interesting. And maybe there's some learning to be done in terms of a social fitness regimen for me is, maybe I've gotten a little bit out of shape when it comes to asking folks to dig deep, to push harder, and to take on challenges that might be intense and stressful and unpleasant and uncomfortable for both of us, but ultimately can take you to some cool places in terms of growth and development and achievements that are bigger than either one of us thought were possible. Perhaps great tips from Henna, working out that awkwardness muscle. Do it awkward, but do it anyway. Again, the show notes, the transcript, and the links to items that we've referenced are found at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP914. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full-text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.